Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Before we get started today, I'd invite you to take a moment to click the like button on our video, to subscribe to the broadcast if you haven't yet, and to click the bell icon if you'd like to get weekly reminders about our show.
So each week, Todd and I will be having a conversation about the upcoming lectionary reading in the Gospels for the upcoming weekend. And our hope is that we will talk about that passage in the context of love and inclusion and societal justice, that our talking will be just, as in just talking. Um, uh, but that also something we might say during this conversation would do something to inspire us to do more than just talking. So, Todd, what passage are we looking at this week?
We are in Matthew 25, verses 1 through 13, looking at the parable of the 10 maidens or bridesmaids.
Sweet. So, yeah, this parable is a challenge for me. Um, it's not one of my favorites, but it it triggers a deeper debate within historical Jesus scholarship that is challenging. Um, so I don't know. Maybe we should talk about that first. A little bit of the context of this.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be helpful.
So the debate is whether or not Jesus was an apocalyptic in the sense that he thought the kingdom of God was coming, or whether or not Jesus was saying the kingdom was already here in the present, that it's among you, it's within you, it's here now, that it's arrived. And you have scholars on either side. Those scholars that lean more towards Jesus thinking the world was about to end and the kingdom's about to arrive, and he's announcing that. The reason this conversation matters is because that interpretation is vulnerable to the to explaining away the economic teachings of Jesus. I've heard Jesus scholars who believe that Jesus was an apocalypticist say, well, of course, Jesus told the rich people to sell everything they owned and give it to the poor because Jesus thought the world was about to end. That's not sustainable. But you have others that, like Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan in the historical Jesus scholarship camp, that aren't apocalypticists. They believe that Jesus was saying the kingdom is not coming, the kingdom is here, and this is what it looks like. And the kingdom is where we sell everything we have and give it to the poor. So it's not as subtle a difference as it sounds. That camp would say that Jesus' teachings are what they are, that they're sustainable. Both camps say that John the Baptist was looking forward, saying something's coming. And
Mhm.
certainly after Jesus's death, the Jesus's followers were forward looking, saying Jesus is going to return.
Mhm.
But the question is whether Jesus was the historical Jesus was like that, saying the kingdom's about to arrive, or whether saying Jesus was teaching, no, the kingdom is here, and this is how we participate in the already present kingdom. And again, that interpretation of Jesus says that Jesus's ethical teachings, including his economic teachings, are sustainable and a pathway towards life in the here and now, of share mutual aid, resource sharing, wealth redistribution, those types of principles. And others say, no, the reason Jesus said things like he did was because he thought the world was about to end. And so if the world's about to end, you can sell everything you have and give it away to the poor. It doesn't matter. And so again, there's this debate. When we get to our reading this week, it sure sounds more like it's addressing the concerns of the Jesus community after Jesus's death, when the gospel was being written down, then it just doesn't sound like it's coming from the same Jesus as is characterized by the rest of the Gospel of Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
And the lesson is pretty obvious, be prepared. Something's coming. Those who are prepared, they'll be okay. Those who aren't prepared won't. But all throughout the Gospel of Matthew, specifically the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is about resource sharing and about us taking care of one another. His message is one of abundance, where God provides enough for everybody every day. So if you have more than what you need, then share it with those who don't have enough. And it's this commitment to take care of one another, to make sure everybody has what they need to thrive. And then you get to this parable, and all of a sudden it's not the kingdom has arrived, it's the kingdom is coming. And and you got to be prepared, or else you're going to miss out.
Mm-hmm.
And in
Mm-hmm.
the end, these maidens, some of them had enough oil. It's not a narrative of abundance. It's a narrative It's a narrative of
Scarcity.
scarcity,
Mm-hmm.
where they have just enough for themselves, so they don't share. They don't make sure everybody has enough. They
Yep.
only have enough for themselves. Therefore, you've got to go get your own. It's not a parable like most of Jesus' teachings in Matthew of mutual dependence and
Mm-hmm.
cooperation,
Mm-hmm.
but of individualism and self-reliance, and we've got ours, you got to go get yours. So there's all kinds of characteristics differences here that that makes for interesting material to talk about. But again, where I land with this parable, it sure sounds like it's coming from the Matthean Galilean Jesus community, and the concern that the church be prepared for when Jesus returns,
Mm-hmm.
rather than it just doesn't sound like the same Jesus in the other parables of Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and if we're saying that Matthew is written post the fall of Jerusalem, um, something that dramatic, and that traumatic, um, would lend itself to apocalyptic type thinking, and it would be understandable that people people might be more in an apocalyptic mindset at that time, and also having gone through, you know having to flee cities and things like that, and and I think about Gazans right now fleeing the Israeli incursion and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that, and just carrying what they can fit in a couple backpacks, and carrying stuff with them. It kind of lends itself to that type of imagery that would have been the experience of a lot of, maybe not the Galileans who were, because they were outside of Jerusalem, but certainly the destruction of Jerusalem was very much at the center of everybody's thinking, and for many people their experience. So, I think of I've just moved down here to Louisiana just a couple months ago, and one of the recurring public service announcements that they put on TV is about having uh, your storm kit ready, so that when the hurricanes come, you have bottled water, and you have blankets, and you have flashlights and batteries, and maybe a few canned goods and things like that. And
Sounds
this
like
whole
our
thing,
parable.
getting, be ready for the hurricane when the hurricane comes, so you can either batten down the hatches at home, or get in the car and go. um that it's that type of mindset. So it's certainly, um yeah, this parable seems to sound more in that context of there's an impending storm coming, which again Jesus doesn't seem to. He's talking about, in most of his parables, transforming things in the here and now, and not talking about an escape mechanism. This sounds like getting ready for escape, and
Yeah,
which
and
is
I appreciate
completely
I appreciate you reminding us that, and in agreement with most scholars, there are outliers, but most folks date the Gospel of Matthew post the destruction of Jerusalem, the raising of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple. It would be a pretty hard sell to try to convince those who had lived through that the kingdom is here and this is what the kingdom looks like.
Yeah.
It would be much easier to sell the kingdom is still future, the kingdom's coming. Don't be too invested in today. Things are going to happen here. Keep your sights on what's coming, just to keep people's hopes up.
Yeah. Apocalypticism kind of is that, it's that soothing the wounds and trying to give people hope who have been gone through a traumatic situation. It's the experience I see with folks who are in the hospital trying to get better from illness, or some kind of disease, or some kind of surgery. It's that more desperate need of God's direct supernatural intervention, rather than talking about how to live for others in the moment when somebody's in the hospital. It's really all about themselves and them getting to a better place. And I think maybe that's the kind of the mindset that these folks they're looking for something
tomorrow.
better to come on the horizon, because it's a disaster today.
Yeah. And so true. I blanked out on what I was going to say. It'll come back to me in a minute.
Yeah. So I think, I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that this is one of those situations where maybe Matthew is the writer of Matthew is adding in some contextual hope and teaching from the context of where they sit post 70 AD.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say, and it's right in line with that. Is that these last few sections of Matthew, these last parables in Matthew, are very much apocalyptic, very much future looking, very much be prepared. That type of when the great reversal is coming. When you look at the first half of Matthew, it is a very different Jesus. The first half of Matthew with the Sermon on the Mount, he's not saying things are coming. He's saying, again, here's the kingdom. The kingdom is present here now. The good news is, and blessed are those who are this, and blessed are those who are that. And this is how you enter into the kingdom in the here and now. And so, again, there's a very, very different flavor to it. So I agree with you, Todd. It seems like there is much more weight of evidence on the side of saying, here is Matthew's version of the Jesus story. And in the last sections of this version of the Jesus story, this author is dealing with the concerns and the needs of the Jesus community at the time that this was written, not reflecting the historical Jesus of the Sermon on the Mount type stuff.
Yeah. And the reality is that what the historical Jesus is teaching would very much still apply
to
what was going on in 70 AD and post 70 AD. Was still looking to take care of one another, fight for one another, advocate, and make sure that those who naturally or not naturally, but culturally would be more prone to exclusion and things like that, to make sure they were included. And that would certainly be even more the case in a time of post 70 AD, that if people were looking after one another, that would Jesus' teachings on economic and
still relevant
would be very more relevant than ever. And it just seems like, but it seems like it takes on existential apocalyptic threat with some of these writings from Matthew at the end that don't necessarily they don't undermine, they don't have to undermine what
Right.
Jesus did, but sometimes Christians who have been more attracted to apocalyptic teaching have used apocalyptic teaching to discount or completely ignore the other
Yes.
economic and justice teachings of Jesus.
That was my point in the very beginning there, that there are sectors of Christians out there that take a both hand approach. They would take offense to maybe some of the things I've said here in our conversation, saying, why can't it be both hand? And they use oxymoronic statements like the kingdom is an already but not yet reality. So it's a both and approach. And I'm okay with that. I think you can be a genuine Jesus follower and be like the Borgs and the Crossons who say, Jesus taught the kingdom is here already. And you can be a genuine Jesus follower and believe that Jesus taught that the kingdom is yet to come, that God's just future is still future. And you can be a genuine Jesus follower and take a both and mixed approach. But if you take a both and mixed approach, and if you do take the position that Jesus wasn't apocalyptic and he looked forward to a kingdom approaching, you have to be careful and intentional that your apocalyptic Jesus doesn't give you permission to ignore the ethical teachings of Jesus in the here and now. It's just a more vulnerable theological position that you have to practice intention with so that you don't end up just looking to the future and being so end of the world minded that you're really no earthly good in the present. The example is people whose hope is in the world ending are the worst people to put in charge of coming up with sustainable, viable solutions to preventing humanity's existence in the world from ending. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And so you have to be just very careful. You have to be cognizant of that reality. And if you're going to subscribe to that apocalyptic theology and define Jesus as an apocalyptic, then you just have to be very careful and intentional to still apply Jesus's ethical teachings in the here and now instead of saying, well, that's how it'll be when Jesus comes back. There's nothing we can do now.
And this is why this we see this very abuse of the parable this apocalyptic abuse happening with this very parable, where you see it's very much about survival. It's survival of the most holy, or the survival. It's not survival of the fittest, but the survival. You got to look out for yourself.
It's the survival of the most prepared.
That's right, and it's all about you taking care of yourself, and you're not going to get to heaven with somebody else's oil. You're going to get to it if you get prepared yourself, and it's very much that's a horrible.
It's horrible.
It's horrible because the implications that flow out of that are so much about what Christianity has done, saying, it's all about your personal relationship with Jesus, about you being prepared for the second coming, you having accomplished certain things or having accepted certain things in order to get, and no one else can get you to heaven. Only you can get, by giving yourself over to what God wants, can get to heaven yourself. So you better take care of yourself,
and that's a very anti first half of Matthew Jesus.
That's right. It totally undermines so much of what Jesus said. This is just where, but this is how I've been taught that parable for years and years and years, and where I learned it, they would tie it into the apocalyptic readings of Daniel and Revelation, and all these things that just reinforce a very individualistic approach to, and a very end of time approach to the kingdom of God.
Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis, of the, is it Middletown Church in New York? Her book Radical Love, she makes a statement in that book that I absolutely cherish. And I'm going to, as we continue on looking at these apocalyptic parables in the end of the Gospel of Matthew over the next few weeks, as we lead into Advent's almost here, everyone. That's kind of some good news. But as we're covering these apocalyptic parables of Matthew here in the end, I'm going to be repeating this quotation often. It's one of my favorites by her. She says, if there is such a thing as salvation, none of us are saved unless all of us are saved.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very different definition of salvation and mutual aid and cooperation and everybody making sure they're taking care of everybody and everybody's taken care of. That's a very different life lesson than I got enough oil for me. I don't have enough for you. You got to go get your own.
Right. Yeah, it seems like this parable would align more with Jesus' other teachings if the parable honors that. I mean, if the parable brought out that the bridesmaids who had oil shared some of their oil with the other bridesmaids who didn't have any oil, and it seems like that would be that so that all of us could go into the wedding banquet. But we would make sure everybody had a little bit of oil to get there, and that seems like that would be a more just.
That's the loaves and the fishes.
Teaching. That's
the loaves and the fishes. I mean, the dude only had enough for himself, but instead he chose to share it, and Jesus blessed it and passed it around, and for some reason there was somehow enough for all 5,000 people with leftover. Where is that lesson in this scarcity of oil where there's just enough for me? You got to go get your own. What if the guy with the loaves of fishes said, I've only got enough food for me. You got to go get your own. Those are two, when you juxtapose those two lessons together, it becomes very apparent that the Jesus in the first half of Matthew is different than the apocalyptic one here in the end.
That's right. That's right.
So I don't have a solution for this. If you are a both-ander, you just have to be careful to remember Jesus taught about the loaves and the fishes, not just oil.
Right. Right. And it would be helpful to understand the context of when this was written and why this might have been a more naturally would be more likely to be shared at a time of deep national trauma than in a normal time, and recognize that it would be. But that presupposes, and I obviously by saying that, we're saying that the Gospels are created by writers who draw on traditional teachings that have been gathered over time, and then they edit them and arrange them according to their personal agendas, and that, of course, is challenging to a certain segment of Christianity that believes that everything was divinely appointed and supernaturally guided. And so our perspective on this obviously believes in a larger human footprint in the creation of the scriptures than maybe some segments of Christianity would teach.
Yeah, I'll admit that.
And realize that's a challenge as well. Yeah.
But even if you don't, you still have to answer why in these last parables, why are they so characteristically different than the parables in the first half? Let's say they all were supernaturally, let's take a fundamentalist approach to the scriptures and inspiration and all of those topics. Why does the parables like this one of the 10 maidens, why does it not, why is it so different both in subject and in language? Why is Jesus's sense of humor missing from it? Like, the eye of the camel, their camel going through the eye of a needle, or why is this parable unlike the other parables? Why is it not critiquing those that are in power in a prophetic way, in that Hebrew prophetic justice tradition, like the other parables are? Why is there no plot twist at the end? I mean, there's no mystery to this parable. It's a universal truth. Be prepared, and it's pretty much on the nose. It's right there on the face of it. There's no mystery. There's no mystery. It just stands out as a very unique parable in the Jesus story, and it's easier for me to believe it's a creation of the author of the Gospel of Matthew to meet the needs of his Jesus community at the time he wrote it, or she wrote it, or they wrote it, rather than trying to do some type of gymnastics to make this be the same Jesus as has been showing up in the Gospel so far.
Right.
And again, if I take the fundamentalist approach to Scripture, I don't have a good answer for the questions that I've raised here. I don't know why this one's so different.
Right.
Just is.
Right.
And in my capitalist world, it is so much easier to follow a Jesus who taught me to make sure I have enough oil for me.
Right.
And everybody else has got to fend for themselves.
Right.
It's very convenient. It's a very appealing Jesus.
It is. So.
And again, I don't have good answers for this week.
Right.
It's one of those challenging parables. I agree with you that it would have been a lot cooler if this parable had ended with kind of that loaves and fishes, where the five maidens said, you know what, we really don't have a lot, but you're more important than oil, so let's just share what little we have. And all of a sudden, they gathered baskets of oil afterwards, and there was enough for everybody. There was, and some left over. They shared with people who didn't even need oil. You know what I mean? that would have been a cool parable.
Seems to fit. That sounds more like the Jesus from much of the synoptics. That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was our take on the 10 bridesmaids. May have left some of you wanting, but that's what we got.
Share your oil. The moral of the story, according to Herb and Todd, is if you've got oil and someone doesn't, share it. There'll be enough for everybody.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, Herb, where can we find you?
You can find me at renewedheartministries.com and everywhere that will lead you after that. And we're still hoping for Todd to join us there soon.
Perhaps I need an apocalyptic motivation to get to start writing. We'll see. Something's gotta kick in for me.
Write something for Advent.
Ooh, okay, maybe so. Maybe so. That's a little bit apocalyptic too.
It is.
So, all right. Well, thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate you journeying with us as we do this, and we will look forward to seeing you next week.
Yep. Tune in next week for another thought-provoking discussion. Thanks for watching, everyone.